Hi, I'm Dr. Mabuse, aka Mike Murphy. This segment will talk about what I did in 2018. This is a device that is known as the An Annoyance of Grackles. My wife is a fanatic birder, and she let me know that a group of grackles is known as an annoyance of grackles. So, and this story, the story of this device is a story of a collaboration about birds. I want to be very clear that the annoyance of grackles is a very elaborate expansion of someone else's idea. That someone else in this case is a very talented young instrument designer by the name of Martin Freeman. And he came up with an idea. And in prior segments, you've probably heard me talk about the magic of a device called a phase-locked loop. And I'm going to go into a little detail. The phase-locked loop is a device. It was very handy for making modems. Some of you may be old enough to remember when modems had a sound. It went excuse me. And that sound was a signal on one end of a phone line, and a signal being generated by the computer, and a device that was going to synchronize those two signals into some kind of a resonance or harmony, so that they could be, so they would come from being not synchronous to synchronous. So a phase-locked loop is a device that needs to listen to something and say, oh, I need to be singing the same tone, or a harmonic, an even harmonic of that tone, and stay there. And if the external tone moves, then I need to move too. Excuse me. The modems went out of style. But the chips remained, and so those chips that could create that synchrony are still on the market, and they are known, as I mentioned, as phase-locked loops. Well, in order to have something to synchronize to, a phase-locked loop device needs to have an oscillator. An oscillator is just a device that wiggles at a fairly steady rate, or at least a rate that stays steady till you want it to change. And Martin was familiar with this feature of the phase-locked loop, and it was an easy way to get multiple oscillators. So I'm going to show a block diagram. And this is a vastly oversimplified diagram of the original device, which Martin named a grackler for obvious reasons. And each of these half circles here represents an oscillator, the oscillator section of a phase-locked loop. And the oscillators put out two types of waves. One of them is a sawtooth wave, or also known as a ramp wave. The other one, it was a square wave, just simple up, down, up, down, up, down. So what Martin did first was he took the output, the sawtooth output of each oscillator, and ran it through a control knob, and to control the pitch of the next sawtooth. And he built it in a circle. If you can see that those are the red lines, those are the control voltages of the sawtooth wave, and they're all modulated by a knob. So the sawtooth of this oscillator is changing the pitch of the sawtooth in the next oscillator, and so on and so forth in a daisy chain. Then he also taps these sawtooths so that you can listen to them. But they are arranged in a circle, and you can't break that circle. So they are always modulating one another. Then he took the square waves and fed them into a digital analog converter, which is simply a device that takes square waves coming in, and it will output a staircase kind of wave it looks literally like a staircase that builds up a few steps and goes down, builds up a few more steps, goes down, goes up one step, comes down again. And that, he was using the square waves from the oscillators to feed into a digital audio converter, and then that staircase wave was modulated through a knob, and it is disseminated into controlling the pitch of all four oscillators. So the salient concept there is that you had one dimension of the sound with one control that affected all oscillators simultaneously, and four controls, each one that controlled how much modulation the next oscillator in line received from its predecessor. Now, now we move to what I took. I took the idea of the grackler and expanded it. I should point out that Martin's idea is very fertile. And the grackler in and of itself, the way he built it, is an extraordinarily rich sounding electronic device. But I had time on my hands, which is a dangerous thing, and I knew that those phase lock loop chips had a good many tricks that they could do beside just being oscillators, and I decided to exploit that. I'm not expecting you to see any detail, but this is a block diagram representation of the grackler as Martin Freeman designed it. And then this is a representation of the grackler as I used it. And I'm simply pointing out that that this design here is significantly more complicated than this one. So there was a lot of expansion that I did to that. And in addition to that core, which in this big block diagram is represented by this arrangement here on the left, I also furthermore added a lot of devices further down the audio stream to the output. Now, on the back of the instrument, well, or the front, depending on which way you're looking at it, there are 6 outputs from left to right. This output is the simple core. The remaining outputs get increasingly more complex. To this is the final output that has all of the stages that I added to it. But this is the gracore core, and we're going to start by listening to that. Now, if you remember those half circles, those oscillators, each one of these knobs represents, in this diamond arrangement on top, represents the amount that the prior oscillator is affecting the, say, the top. We'll call this oscillator number 1, which is also indicated by a red LED. See if I can get it to go on there. The red LED just started blinking. And so oscillator 1 is a red LED. Oscillator 2 is a white LED. Oscillator 3 is a blue LED. 4 is a green LED, just because I could remember red, white, blue, green pretty easily. And right now, we are hearing a simple sawtooth wave, which for those of you who might be unfamiliar, a sawtooth wave is simply a wave that starts low and goes high, then drops back down and does the whole thing over again. So just up, gradually up, down, gradually up, down. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start increasing the amount that the oscillators feed into one another. Now, you can hear in the rising tones, you can almost hear the sawtooth shape. And this shape is repeated throughout the design of the device in very slow rises that you can kind of hear with the whoop. But also in the audio waves themselves, they're all sawtooths. Now, this section of knobs represents, these control the feedback. And what the feedback is if you remember, there was a control that took all of the outputs, ran them through a knob, and then fed them back into controlling all of the oscillators at once. So these are the individual feeds to the sawtooth oscillators. These are overall feedback paths. The big knob in the center is how much of all of these sources are being fed back into the system. And when all of these knobs are down, what I'm doing is I'm actually just feeding back a steady voltage that's raising the level of all four of the oscillators at once, but they're all modulating one another at different amounts because these knobs are all set to different levels. And even that very simple scheme yields complex patterns. Patterns that don't repeat. This is an example of a cybernetic or or sometimes known as a chaotic loop. The Grackler design, as Martin designed it, is essentially a chaotic system. And I added a lot of dimensions to it, but when I talked about the Viaggio di Marconi, I talked about a sample and hold, and one device that I use enormously is to take the output, the final output of a device, and use that as a source wave for a sample and hold that generates control voltages that control the output of the device. So there is a cybernetic, if you will, sort of like a steam engine governor. As the steam engine goes faster, the little throttle balls start to spin out, and then that shuts down the amount of steam to the engine. You know, in the 19th century, they knew about these kinds of feedback loops for control. And so this, this knob is the sample and hold that is on the output of this section, and I'm going to start raising that. And another level of complexity is added to the output. Then I have another overall control system that is tied to a separate oscillator or clock that is always going at a varying rate, and we can add that. And you'll notice that at times it will simply stop, and what that means is that the oscillator that's prior to whichever oscillator you're hearing at the moment has gone down so low that the oscillator is oscillating at subsonic levels, and you can't hear it. And then this knob is the digital analog converter as Martin designed it. And I'm adding that into the mix now too. This control is a lag, or it smooths the staircase so that it resembles more of a triangle than a staircase. But for now, I'm going to just do the staircase. And then I'll bring in other forms of feedback. So now we're getting to Martin's original vision of what a flock of grackles sounds like when they all get together. And part of the aesthetic of this electronium is that it's very much meant to be conducted and not played. You change a control setting and then wait for the effect of your setting to work its way through the cybernetic feedback. So you can make a change and things won't change right away, but they will affect the initial conditions of the current loop, and they will work their way through and make a change later. So it gets to be a bit of a chess game with the device to figure out what control changes are going to take things in which direction. And in my aesthetic, I really don't care as long as it does something interesting. So you learn to kind of sit back and let nature take its course when playing this thing. The LEDs in the panel actually all mean something. I didn't put them on there just for entertainment. The LEDs actually mean something on this device. As I pointed out, I made the 4 oscillators, the red, white, blue, and green, which are visible in this row. And some of their functions are kind of obscure. And with the block diagram, I can interpret what they all mean, but they all indicate various statuses. And what I wanted to point out as a sort of a technical note is you'll notice that there are some multicolored LEDs, LEDs that change color. And these are normally pretty useless devices in that, you know, that you turn the LED on and it changes from red to blue to green on its own, and that cycle is fixed. You can't you can't light up the red, blue, green on your own. These things are just kind of for entertainment or toy displays. But what I learned about them was that they all change at a fixed rate. And so I use them to, if two of them come on at the same time, they will both start out red. And if they are changing together from red to blue to green synchronously, I know that those two events started at the same time. And the multicolors are in here. And that's how I use the multicolored LEDs, is to give me an indication of phase and whether the events that they're signaling started at the same time or at different times. So, and of course, the big knob in the center again is how much feedback in the overall system is being fed back. When it is low, the tempo slows down quite a bit. It can take quite a while for an event to start up. So basically, at its low extension, it creates an open or very slow tempo of the various events that are going to happen. As you go up, the tempo increases and can get really frantic. To the point where it's just visible it is. There's a rather faint white LED up here, and what that does is tell me how much of the feedback loop is being fed back and how much it's changing. Because with all of these controllers down, the white LED up here is steady. And the only thing that's changing is the offset of how much it's feeding the feedback loop here. Then when I bring the modulators in, now, so far we have only been listening to the what I call the core of the circuit, which is my expansion of Martin Freeman's Grackler idea. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take us to the end of the signal chain and listen to all the processing circuitry that I added to the Grackler. And in talking about this, what I have to point out is that that the sample and hold idea, where I take the signal from the device itself and sample it into patterns. I do this multiple times and get multiple patterns with sample and hold circuits that are designed to have various parameters changed so that they aren't all looking at the same level of signal, at the same frequencies, or responding. And as you can hear, things get pretty complex. And another device that I use that I call a resonator, which is not quite a filter, but adds harmonics, is endemic to the Grackler circuit. And the frequency at which it resonates is, again, determined by an array of these sample and holds. Now, as you can hear, the output, when it's processed through all of those resonators and being switched and being routed through other processing modules by the sample and holds, very much complicates the output. I'm letting it do its thing here to demonstrate the breadth of complexity that these feedback loops can yield. Now, and my intention for once came true in the process, and that is that I wanted it so that I could use one knob to more or less control the entire performance. And that's why I made it the big knob. And then if I want to quiet things down, I bring it back to that. You will notice that there are no patch points on the front panel of this device. And that was deliberate. I didn't want to approach it like a modular synthesizer. And I wanted all the configuration to be able to be done easily in real time. There are patch points in the circuit. I can configure the way that everything feeds back into itself with patch points. And what I did was I exploited a feature of this old RCA radio cabinet. It has an open top here, and inside I put a banana plug patch panel. And I am letting the pauses happen as they happen. I really love the fact that this instrument will create its own silences, and that it doesn't rely on a performer to do that. Now, of course, you could say, well, the performer isn't exerting intent in that conducting, but but I have timed it carefully, and it will never stop. It will resume playing. In a performance, I reserve the right to goose it and move it along if I think enough silence has passed. But it's interesting that I learned in these feedback loops that you can generate a great deal more silence by turning everything up. And the way to get it more active is to reduce the amount of intermodulation. This was another reason that I really favored using the LEDs, because they give me an indication when it starts to get into a very locked pattern. I can kind of see the events that are going to break that pattern into either silence or something more complex coming based on which LEDs are turning on when and whether they're synchronized or not. And I've never heard it do this before, and so I'm just letting this madness unfold on its own. Now I'm really trying to mess with it. Well, I think it's saying that it's done. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, The Annoyance of Grackles, an expansion on a genius idea by a young man named Martin Freeman, and inspired by the Grackles themselves.